All right, guys. This is the read aloud for the 54th Massachusetts Regiment reading, which you're going to use for your assignment today. Remember, like always, this is not the video lesson. If you have not watched that yet, you need to go watch that. It's attached to this assignment on Google Classroom. But if you have already watched the video and you're about to do the assignment, and it helps you to hear the readings read aloud, then you're in the right place. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The 54th Massachusetts Regiment reading. From the beginning of the Civil War, President Lincoln argued that the Union forces were not fighting to end slavery, but to prevent the disintegration of the United States. That means the breaking apart, essentially. For abolitionists, however, ending slavery was the reason for the war, and they argued that Black people should be able to join the fight for their freedom. However, African Americans were not allowed to serve as soldiers in the Union Army until January 1st, 1863. On that day, the Emancipation Proclamation decreed that, quote, such persons, meaning African American men, of suitable condition will be received into the armed forces of the United States. The 54th Massachusetts. Early in February 1863, the abolitionist governor, John A. Andrew of Massachusetts, issued the Civil War's first call for Black soldiers. Massachusetts did not have many African American residents, but by the time the 54th Infantry Regiment headed off to training camp 2 weeks later, more than 1,000 men had volunteered. Many came from other states such as New York, Indiana, and Ohio. Some even came from Canada. 1/4 of the volunteers came from slave states in the Caribbean. Fathers and sons, some as young as 16, enlisted together. The most famous enlistees were Charles and Lewis Douglas, two sons of abolitionist Frederick Douglass. To lead the 54th Massachusetts, Governor Andrew chose a young white officer named Robert Gould Shaw. Shaw's parents were wealthy and prominent abolitionist activists. Shaw himself had dropped out of Harvard to join the Union Army and had been injured in the Battle of Antietam, which is a clip I showed you the other day. He was just 25 years old. That is very young. All right, so full of hope and glory. At 9 o'clock in the morning on May 28, 1863, the 54th's 1,007 Black soldiers and 37 white officers gathered in the Boston Common and prepared to head to the battlefields of the South. They did so in spite of an announcement by the Confederate Congress that every captured Black soldier would be sold into slavery and every white officer in command of Black troops would be executed, which we saw that clip today. Cheering well-wishers, including the anti-slavery advocates William Lloyd Garrison, Wendell Phillips, and Frederick Douglass, lined Boston's streets. Fighting discrimination. Colonel Shaw and his troops landed at Hilton Head on June 3rd. The next week, they were forced by Shaw's superiors to participate in a particularly destructive raid on the town of Darien, Georgia. The colonel was furious. His troops had come south to fight for freedom and justice, he argued, not to destroy undefended towns with no military significance. He wrote to General George Strong and asked if the 54th might lead the next Union charge on the battlefield. Even as they fought to end slavery in the Confederacy, the African-American soldiers of the 54th were fighting against another injustice as well. The U.S. Army paid Black soldiers $10 a week. White soldiers got $3 more. To protest against this insult, the entire regiment, soldiers and officers alike, refused to accept their wages until Black and white soldiers earned equal pay for equal work. This did not happen until the war was almost over. Tragedy at Fort Wagner. On July 18, 1863, the 54th Massachusetts prepared to storm Fort Wagner, which guarded the port of Charleston. At dusk, Shaw gathered 600 of his men on a narrow strip of sand just outside Wagner's fortified walls and readied them for action. I want you to prove yourselves, he said. The eyes of thousands look on at what you do tonight. As night fell, Shaw led his men over the walls of the fort. This was unusual. Typically, officers followed their soldiers into battle. Unfortunately, the Union generals had miscalculated. 1,700 Confederate soldiers waited inside the fort, ready for battle. The men of the 54th were outgunned and outnumbered. 281 of the 600 charging soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. Shaw himself was shot in the chest on his way over the wall and died instantly. To show their disgust for the soldiers of the 54th, the Confederates dumped all of their bodies in a single unmarked trench and cabled Union leaders that, quote, said, "We have buried Shaw with his N-words." The Southerners expected that this would be such an insult that white officers would no longer be willing to fight with black troops. In fact, the opposite was true. Shaw's parents replied that there could be, quote, "no holier place to be buried than surrounded by brave and devoted soldiers." The 54th lost the battle at Fort Wagner, but they did a great deal of damage there. Confederate troops abandoned the fort soon afterwards. It also convinced Union leaders that African American soldiers were just as effective as white soldiers and opened the door for more black soldiers to enlist. For the next 2 years, the regiment participated in a series of successful siege operations in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. The 54th Massachusetts returned to Boston in September 1865. Okay, so there's your reading. You will use that information to complete the activity for today. And as always, send me any messages if you have questions. All right, see you guys.